Have you ever been so sure someone would stay, only to watch them walk away as if you were nothing more than a chapter they had already finished reading? It's a gut punch, isn't it? They leave with confidence, maybe even a little arrogance, believing you'll be right there if they ever decide to come back. And for a while, maybe you are. Maybe you sit with the ache, with the silence, with the memories playing on repeat in your mind. You check your phone, you go over conversations, you try to figure out what you could have said differently, done, better, loved harder, but nothing changes the fact that they're gone. And worse, they're gone thinking you'll wait. That's the story too many of us are handed. Be patient, stay loyal, don't move on too quickly. They might just realize your value if you hold on long enough. But here's the truth they don't tell you. Waiting doesn't guarantee they'll return. It doesn't guarantee healing, and it certainly doesn't guarantee self-respect. What if everything you need isn't in their return, but in your decision to stop waiting? In this video, we're pulling back the emotional curtain on what really happens when someone leaves thinking you'll wait, and how in 7 powerful phases they become the one left waiting instead. This is not about bitterness, it's about awakening. It's about Stoic relationships, about learning when love turns into self-abandonment and when letting go becomes an act of strength, not surrender. Through reflection, clarity, and the unshakable wisdom of Stoicism, you'll learn how to reclaim your identity, rebuild from the silence, and rediscover your power. These 7 phases will challenge the stories you've been told about love, loyalty, and loss. And if you let them, they'll guide you to a version of yourself that no longer waits to be chosen. You'll walk away from this video not just informed, but transformed. So if you're ready to stop living in the pause someone else created, if you're tired of waiting in the shadows of a love that disappeared, stay with me. Because this isn't just about heartbreak, it's about resurrection. It's about what happens when you choose to heal, grow, and rise, not for them, but for yourself. The story they wrote isn't the only story, and the moment you stop waiting is the moment you begin to rewrite everything. This is your moment, this is your power, and I promise you, the ending will be worth it. On the exit, when they took you for granted. They never thought you'd walk away. Not really. Even as they closed the door behind them, they were convinced you'd leave a light on. They believed you'd sit with your heart open, just in case they decided to return. And why wouldn't they think that? You gave them every reason to. Every second chance, every overlooked mistake, every tear you swallowed quietly. Those became the unspoken contract that you'd wait, no matter what. But here's the part they never understood. Kindness isn't the same as blindness, and love doesn't make you their emotional insurance policy. In the quiet corners of their mind, they crafted a version of you that would remain suspended in time, loyal to a memory, while they ran off to chase something else, something easier, something shinier, something that didn't demand reflection. When they left, they weren't uncertain. They weren't afraid of losing you. They were certain you'd be there if things didn't work out elsewhere. They thought your silence meant weakness, that your patience meant passivity, that your deep emotional investment guaranteed your emotional captivity. They underestimated your ability to evolve because they never really looked at your strength. They only saw their ability to stretch it. But strength isn't measured by how much pain you can absorb. Strength, real Stoic strength, is measured by how you choose to rise when you're left with nothing but the echo of their absence. Isn't it strange how the person who claims to love you can also be the one who walks away so easily? One moment, they're in your arms, the next, they're gone. No warning, no ceremony, just a quiet shift in energy followed by a growing distance that you can feel even in their silence. You ask yourself 100 questions. Was I too much? Was I not enough? Did they ever really love me? But Stoicism invites us to ask different questions. Why am I assigning my worth to someone who chose to leave? Why do I let their decision become my definition? They thought you'd wait because waiting had become the rhythm of your love. You waited while they figured themselves out. You waited through inconsistency, through hot and cold affection, through emotional breadcrumbing that always left you starving but still hoping. You waited through uncertainty, trusting in potential rather than presence. And in doing so, you disappeared slowly into the background of your own life. That's the cruelty of misplaced loyalty. It doesn't kill you quickly. It erodes you. In silence, it turns days into doubts and dreams into delays, until one day you no longer recognize the reflection in the mirror because it's been shaped too much by someone who couldn't even decide whether to stay or leave. They told themselves a story about you, that you were the constant, that you'd hold on no matter how much they pulled away, that your love was a guarantee, a soft place to land if the world got too harsh. But people often mistake compassion for dependency and emotional depth for emotional submission. The truth is, you weren't weak, you were loyal, you weren't naive, you were hopeful. And most of all, you weren't waiting because you didn't have options. You were waiting because you believed in love. But belief without reciprocation becomes bondage. And there comes a moment, a breaking point, when even the most forgiving heart says, no more. That moment doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in the silence, in the stillness after another unanswered text, in the emptiness of realizing they don't check in anymore. It arrives quietly, but its power is seismic. It shakes the foundations of who you were when they left. And from that rubble, something new begins to rise. Not a colder version of you, but a clearer one. A self no longer defined by who stays or who leaves. A self that learns to be enough even in solitude. The philosophy of Stoicism doesn't teach us to harden or to hate. It teaches us to understand impermanence. It teaches us that our peace should never be in the hands of someone else's inconsistency. That emotional freedom begins when we stop waiting for someone to make us feel chosen. It reminds us that we cannot control who walks away, but we can choose whether we chase them or turn inward and heal. As they left, they may have felt relief, a sense of liberation even. But freedom gained at the expense of someone else's heart is never true freedom. It's escapism, and escapism always comes with a cost. It often takes time, but eventually people realize that what they discarded was the rarest thing of all. Someone who truly saw them, stood by them, and wanted to build something real. And yet your job was never to teach them your value by staying when they didn't see it. Your job was to see your value first, even when they couldn't. That's where your power begins, not in convincing someone to return, but in realizing you've already moved on internally, even before they noticed. That quiet detachment, that invisible shift where you start choosing yourself, that's the real beginning of emotional liberation. You may have cried, you may have shattered, you may have begged the universe for clarity, but every tear you shed was also washing away the illusion that their love was your only source of light. And now, in the wake of their departure, something unexpected begins to emerge. Clarity. Clarity that you were never meant to remain still while they explored. That your love isn't a holding cell for the emotionally unavailable. That your time, your heart, your peace, they are not souvenirs to be picked up when convenient. As they enjoy the freedom they so boldly claimed, something else begins to happen. Slowly they start to look back, not always in dramatic ways. Maybe through a song, a photo, a memory they thought had faded. But it's there, that moment where they realize the silence they left behind is no longer filled with your longing, it's filled with your absence. And absence is powerful. It forces people to face what they walked away from. It makes them realize that the door they assumed would always be unlocked is now closed, not out of spite, but out of growth. That's when the reversal begins. They thought they could return whenever they chose. But what happens when they come? back and find that you're no longer there emotionally, that you've filled the void with peace, purpose, and presence, that you're building a life that no longer makes room for maybes and half-hearted promises. That's the part that stings, not your bitterness, but your absence, not your anger, but your indifference. And let's be clear, indifference isn't cruelty. It's the highest form of freedom. When you no longer feel the need to be understood by someone who refused to see you, you are no longer their prisoner. That's the core of Stoic relationships. They aren't about detachment for the sake of detachment. They are about choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over temporary affection. So when they left thinking you'd wait, they weren't just misjudging you, they were revealing their own emotional immaturity. They assumed your world revolved around them, but the world kept turning, you kept growing, and now the silence they left behind has become the echo of a lesson they'll carry. That love isn't about who leaves and returns, it's about who stays and grows. And you chose growth, and in doing so you proved that the strongest hearts aren't the ones who wait. They're the ones who rise, even when no one is watching. To the silence, your loneliest yet most powerful season. Silence, that's what followed after they left. No dramatic fallout, no heated exchange, just stillness. And in that stillness, you felt everything. The silence was louder than their presence had ever been, echoing in every room, every routine, every moment you used to share. It's funny how the absence of sound can scream so loud, isn't it? At first, that silence felt like punishment, like a weight pressing on your chest every morning. You reached for your phone, half expecting a message. You turned your head in conversations, still imagining their voice chiming in. But nothing. The days stretched longer and the nights were brutal. Loneliness has a way of turning every minute into an hour. You started to second-guess yourself. Was it your fault? Did you say too much, feel too much, hold on too tightly? But Stoicism doesn't ask you to silence your pain. It asks you to observe it, to sit with it, to learn from it. This was the season you thought would break you, and in many ways it did, but not in the way you expected. It didn't destroy you. It unraveled you. It pulled apart every piece of identity you had wrapped up in someone else and scattered it across the floor. You were forced to see what was yours and what was never truly you. That's what the silence gives you. Space to see clearly. First, you resisted it. You filled your days with distractions, music, noise, scrolling endlessly, chasing dopamine through conversations with people you didn't really care about. But nothing stuck, nothing filled the void, because the void wasn't created by their absence, it was uncovered by it. You started to notice things, how you laughed less, how you kept checking your phone even though you knew they wouldn't reach out, how your world had been orbiting around a person who was no longer in it. That realization hit hard, but it also sparked something deep within you, a need to reclaim your own gravity. And that's where the healing truly began, not when they left, but when you stopped expecting them to return, when you stopped giving your future away to the hope that they might come back and make sense of what they'd broken. You began to build your life in the space where they used to be, slowly, awkwardly, but authentically. There were days you felt like you were pretending, smiling in public only to collapse in private. There were moments you questioned everything, your worth, your strength, your ability to ever feel whole again. But each of those moments was a brick, a piece of the foundation you were laying beneath your feet, and over time, without even realizing it, you started standing taller. The silence that once tortured you became your sanctuary. You began to enjoy your own company again. You remembered who you were before they defined your days, and in those quiet hours, you found something they never gave you: peace. That's the irony of growth. It doesn't arrive in the noise. It sneaks in during the quiet. During the mornings, you rise without needing validation. During the nights, you sleep without replaying old conversations. during the decisions you make based on your own needs, not the fear of losing someone else. This was your loneliest season, but also your most powerful, because power isn't about control, it's about self-command. And you, my friend, began to command your life again. You stopped explaining yourself to ghosts. You stopped begging the past for closure. You started writing a new narrative, one where your healing wasn't dependent on someone else's guilt. This season wasn't just lonely, it was sacred. You were being sculpted, sharpened, prepared. Every tear, every night you laid awake wondering, what went wrong? Every time you resisted the urge to reach out, they were victories. Silent ones, invisible ones, but real and meaningful. You were building endurance, the kind of emotional stamina that can only be earned in solitude. Stoic relationships aren't about who stays, they're about who grows, especially when no one is watching. And you, in your quiet becoming, were growing into someone they'll no longer recognize. Someone stronger, someone rooted, someone whole. Let's not pretend it was easy. There were setbacks. You almost texted them. You stalked their social media. You saw them laughing in stories that made you question whether your entire connection had been a lie. But even in those fragile moments, you came back to yourself. Not because it felt good, but because it felt necessary. You were done betraying yourself to hold space for someone who refused to hold space for you. And as you reclaimed your boundaries, your values, your vision, you stopped shrinking for someone who couldn't even see your worth when it was offered freely. This is the part where something beautiful starts to bloom. Others begin to notice your shift. You move with more intention. You speak with more calm. You react less. Observe more. You smile, not because you're healed, but because you've stopped trying to be. You've accepted that healing is not a destination. It's a way of walking through life, one step, one breath, one choice at a time. You no longer need them to apologize. You don't crave a confession or closure or an explanation. Your peace no longer depends on them. It depends on you. And that right there is power. At this point, I want to pause and ask you, if you're feeling this shift inside yourself, if you know what it's like to sit in that silence and rise from it slowly, like this video, and comment number 1 down below, that lets me know I'm speaking to your soul. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We're building something real here, something grounded in healing, clarity, and transformation. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's bring it back to you. As the silence becomes more familiar, it stops being something you fear and starts becoming something you protect. You no longer tolerate noise that disrupts your peace. You're no longer impressed by the idea of someone coming back. You're only interested in people who never leave when things get hard. That's how Stoicism reshapes your relationships. It removes the drama and replaces it with discernment. You begin to look at people's patterns, not just their promises. You listen to your intuition more. You forgive more freely, but you trust more slowly. Not out of bitterness, but because peace has become your priority. Eventually, the silence is no longer a void. It becomes a filter. It reveals who checks in, who disappears, who shows up not just when they need something, but when you do. You begin to attract differently. You no longer chase energy that pulls away. You no longer accept crumbs and call it love. You no longer bend yourself to be palatable. You start living from your center, and it shows. People notice, including them. That's when the tables quietly begin to turn. Maybe they don't say anything at first. Maybe they just watch from a distance. A view of your life they once took for granted now feels like something they can't reach. And that discomfort, that regret, it's not something you need to feed. You don't have to prove anything. Your peace is your proof. Your growth is the response. Your life, centered, grounded, free, is the only answer you'll ever need to give. They left thinking silence would break you, that you'd stay stuck. in longing, wrapped in memories, desperate for their attention. But instead, you used the silence as a forge. You let it refine you, strengthen you, rebuild you, and now the version of you they expected to wait, that version no longer exists. You've outgrown the chapter they abandoned. You've stepped into a life that doesn't leave space for ghosts, and that, above all, is the most powerful transformation of all. 3. The awakening, rediscovering yourself without them. There comes a moment, often unnoticed at first, when the heaviness begins to lift. It doesn't arrive with clarity or confidence, not right away. It arrives in small, almost imperceptible shifts, like waking up one morning and realizing you didn't check your phone to see if they texted, or walking past a memory without feeling like it drags you backward. It's not that the pain disappears, it's that it softens. It takes up less space. It stops ruling your day. That's the beginning of the awakening, though you may not recognize it at first, because the early stages of rediscovery often look like disinterest. You start saying no to things you used to agree to. You stop pretending. You begin questioning why you ever tolerated so much for so little in return. And those questions are sacred. They're signs that your soul is waking up from the emotional anesthesia of attachment. What follows is not a rebirth in fire, but a rising in light, steady, quiet, but undeniable. You begin noticing how much of yourself you had tucked away to keep someone else comfortable. The way you diminished your needs so you wouldn't be labeled too much. The way you withheld your truth out of fear it might scare them off. You see now how much effort you poured into keeping their love, even when it was clear they weren't showing up fully for you. There's a sting in that realization, but also freedom, because to see the truth is to begin freeing yourself from the lie. And the lie was that you needed them to be whole. You never did. You were simply taught to believe your value was connected to how much you were needed, how deeply you were chosen, how fully you were kept. But that was never love. It was dependency disguised as devotion. True love doesn't ask you to lose yourself to be worthy of staying. It invites you to bring your whole self and still be accepted. Now, with space to breathe, you start wondering what it feels like to live without contorting yourself for approval. This is when you start reaching inward instead of reaching out. You start exploring the pieces of you that were buried beneath their expectations. You pick up the books you abandoned. You revisit the goals you pushed aside. You follow the curiosities that once made you feel alive. It's strange at first, almost unfamiliar. Reconnecting with yourself after abandoning parts of who you are for someone else can feel like getting to know a stranger. But with every moment of alignment, with every choice you make for you, not for them, you begin to remember. You remember what it's like to make decisions without fear of rejection. You remember the sound of your own voice without apology. You remember your passions, your preferences, your peace, and that remembrance is everything. It's the beginning of you rebuilding a relationship that never should have been sacrificed in the first place, the relationship with yourself. You don't need dramatic declarations or grand reinventions to mark this chapter. The power lies in the subtle shifts, the quiet moments where you choose yourself, like leaving a conversation that drains you instead of staying to keep the peace, like allowing yourself to feel joy without guilt, like embracing solitude not as a punishment, but as a sanctuary. These small moments accumulate. They build a new kind of strength, not the performative kind, but the embodied kind. The kind of strength that no longer needs to prove anything. You're no longer trying to win them back. You're not rehearsing the perfect thing to say if they ever reach out. You're simply living, breathing, becoming, and it shows. People may start to notice the shift. Friends might comment on how you seem lighter, more present. You smile more, not to cover up pain, but because you're genuinely starting to feel at peace. And that smile, it's not for them, it's for you. It's for every version of you that stayed soft while walking through fire. It's for the you that chose to grow instead of retaliate. It's for the you that finally said, I deserve more, and meant it, that awakening is sacred. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to be witnessed. But when it is, it radiates. It changes the way you walk into rooms, the way you carry yourself, the way you make decisions, because now you're choosing from a place of wholeness, not hunger. This transformation isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention, but it is powerful. You begin to realize that your worth is no longer tied to who stays or who leaves. It's tied to who you are when no one else is in the room. You stop trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shrinking to make others feel comfortable. You stop bending your truth to avoid conflict. Instead, you learn to stand in your own presence, to hold space for your own voice, to choose boundaries not as walls, but as invitations for others to meet you in your authenticity. What they never expected when they left was that you would return to yourself so completely. They thought you'd stay fragmented, that you'd remain stuck in sorrow, that you'd keep orbiting around a moment that has long since passed. But you didn't. You used the pain as fuel. You used the silence as soil, and now you're rooted in something real, something unshakable, something they can no longer touch. That's the most beautiful part of the awakening. It reclaims everything they thought they took with them. Your peace, your power, your sense of self, all of it returned to you in full and then some. This stage is where you start to see life through new eyes. What used to trigger you now teaches you. What used to break you now builds you. What used to feel like rejection now feels like redirection. You realize that their leaving wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of the one you were always meant to write. And you're writing it boldly, truthfully, intentionally. With every new chapter, you're no longer trying to fit someone else's script. You're crafting your own. You're dreaming again, but this time the dreams include you at the center, not someone else's validation. You're no longer performing for love. You're living in alignment with it, and maybe they start to notice. Maybe they hear about your glow. Maybe they scroll through your photos and feel a pang they can't explain, but that's not your business anymore. What matters now is how you feel when you wake up, how you move through your days, how you trust yourself to handle whatever comes next, not because you've armored up, but because you've softened wisely. That's the essence of Stoicism, not detachment, but discernment, not numbness, but self-possession. And in this new chapter, you are fully possessed by your own becoming. They left thinking you'd remain who you were when they walked away. But who you were is gone. In their absence, you didn't just survive, you rediscovered yourself. You woke up. And that awakening was never about proving them wrong. It was about finally seeing yourself clearly. The love you gave them, you learned to give that to yourself. The energy you invested in hoping for their return, you invested it in your growth. The dreams you once shared with them, you reclaimed them as your own. And that, more than anything, is the true reversal. They thought you'd wait, but now you're not just moving on, you're rising, and you're doing it without looking back. 4. The shift, when they realized you weren't coming back. There's a subtle moment that changes everything, a quiet shift in the atmosphere, like the temperature dropping before a storm. They don't see it coming, not at first. They've been living their life as if your heart was still in their back pocket, as if the thread that once connected you both could be pulled again whenever they pleased. But something's different now, and they can feel it, even if they can't name it. You're no longer holding space for them. That presence, once so dependable, has vanished. And it's not that you made a big announcement, you didn't slam the door. You simply stopped answering it. You stopped waiting. You stopped hoping. And that stillness, it's more deafening to them than any angry words could ever be. At first, they assumed your distance was temporary, that you just needed time. told themselves you'd cool off, come back to your senses, reach out like you always did. That's the story they needed to believe. Because facing the truth that they walked away from someone who loved them deeply and wouldn't wait forever requires a level of self-awareness most people avoid. But life has a way of humbling us in silence, and eventually they start to notice what's missing. It's in the little things. They catch themselves thinking of you during moments they once never shared. They go to send a message but stop, because the dynamic has shifted, and the unspoken balance of power no longer tilts in their favor. Where there used to be assurance, there is now doubt. Where they once expected access, they now find distance. This is the part where memory becomes sharper than reality. They start remembering how you used to laugh, how you listened, not just to respond, but to understand, how you made space for their insecurities without judgment. They remember your warmth, your patience, your presence, and it hits them. They traded something rare for something convenient. Maybe they didn't realize it then. Maybe they were too distracted, too caught up in their own story. But now, with nothing but space between you, clarity creeps in. And that clarity stings, because while they assumed you were standing still, frozen in some emotional time capsule, you've been moving forward, slowly building a life that no longer includes their shadow. The hardest realization they face isn't that you're gone. It's that they no longer have access to the version of you that once loved them unconditionally. That version evolved. That version learned. That version stopped, offering their heart to someone who only valued it in hindsight. And now they're left with the version of you who sees clearly, who chooses peace, who doesn't chase ghosts. And for them, that change is jarring. Because emotional safety, once taken for granted, has been replaced by emotional distance. And that distance is the loudest message you've ever sent. They may try to reach out, a casual hey or a comment on your post, something to gauge your response, to test the waters, to see if the door is still open. But you don't rush to reply. You don't make space out of old habit. You don't light yourself on fire to keep them warm anymore. Not because you're bitter, but because you're no longer available to confusion. You've outgrown the pattern of giving without receiving. You've stopped trying to prove your worth to someone who couldn't see it when it was offered freely. And that boundary? It's not punishment, it's preservation. This is the turning point, the shift they didn't expect. And as it unfolds, they begin to understand something vital. They never lost your love. They lost your access. Love you may still carry, compassion even, but access. That requires consistency, accountability, effort. And those are the very things they withheld when it mattered. Now they watch from afar, and the pain they feel isn't just about missing you, it's about knowing they created the very silence that now surrounds them. There's a poetic justice in it, isn't there? They walked away, assuming time would freeze, that you'd wait untouched by growth or change. But time didn't stop. You didn't stop. And now they're chasing something they can no longer reach, not because you're being cruel, but because you've simply moved beyond the cycle. You're not looking back, not out of defiance, but out of devotion to yourself, your peace, your healing. This is what it means to rise from the ashes, not with vengeance, but with vision. And in that rising, you become undeniable. Your glow returns, not the one they remember, but a new one that's forged in fire, in silence, in rediscovery. You're walking differently, speaking differently. You're rooted in your worth now, and that energy can't be faked or fabricated. It's felt, and they feel it. That's when the regret hits hardest, not just that they lost you, but that they never really appreciated what they had when it was theirs to hold. They remember your patience, your grace, the way you stayed, even when you had every reason to leave. And now that you've left quietly, they see what presence really meant. Because absence is the greatest teacher. It shows people the value of things they once ignored, There's nothing for you to prove anymore, no performance left to give. You're not waiting for closure. You're not hoping for change. You've created your own closure in the way you've chosen yourself. That's the shift that changed everything, not their regret, but your release. And that release isn't just emotional, it's energetic. You're no longer carrying the weight of someone else's indecision. You're no longer building a future on the hope that someone might come back better. You're living in the now, and that presence is magnetic. People start to notice, not just them, but the world. New connections open, new doors appear. Because when you stop pouring into the past, you make space for the present to flourish. This is the moment you realize the most powerful kind of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's radiance, it's peace, it's being so aligned with yourself that you no longer need anyone to validate your path. You're walking in clarity now, rooted in Stoic relationships, guided by Stoicism, holding firm to the truth that love is not about attachment, it's about presence, alignment, and mutual growth. And anything less than that, you no longer invite it in. You no longer tolerate half-efforts or emotional ambiguity. You've lived through the silence and risen through the storm. Now you walk with a calm that no longer flinches at uncertainty. And for them, that calm is unnerving, because they remember how much noise their absence used to cause in your world. Now their presence doesn't even ripple the surface. You become untouchable, not in a cold or arrogant way, but in a way that says, I've earned my peace, and I won't sacrifice it for anyone who doesn't bring clarity. They start to linger in old photos, revisit messages they never responded. Too good they scroll through your world, now blooming without them, and wonder when exactly the shift occurred. But it's not one moment they missed, it's the collection of all the ones they took for granted. And now, all those moments echo back as silence. If you've ever felt this shift, if you know what it's like to stop looking back, to finally move forward with your whole heart, like and comment number 1 if you enjoyed this video. That tells me you're not just watching, you're growing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. This journey isn't over. There's more awakening, more reflection, more truth ahead, and you deserve to walk it with clarity and strength. Now, let's bring it home. The shift isn't just about them realizing you're not coming back. It's about you realizing you were never meant to stay in a place that couldn't see your value. You were never meant to shrink to fit someone else's comfort zone. You were never meant to live small just to keep someone else from feeling insecure. This shift is your liberation, your evolution. And now, with every step forward, you're writing a story that's not about who left, but about who rose in their absence. 5. The irony. Now they're the one holding on. There's a peculiar shift in energy that happens when someone who once dismissed your love begins to crave your attention. It doesn't come all at once. It creeps in slowly. At first, it's subtle. A view on your story, a like on a photo, a vague message that pretends to be casual but carries weight beneath the surface. They don't know how to say it out loud, but their silence now feels heavy. The irony is undeniable. They left thinking you'd wait, but now they linger in the echoes of a connection they thought was disposable. The distance they created, the space they needed, the freedom they fought for. It has all turned into a mirror reflecting their own emptiness. They thought detaching would feel like release, but instead it's become a vacuum. And now they find themselves holding onto shadows, clinging to a past they didn't nurture when it was theirs. This is the stage where their mind begins to play tricks on them. They convince themselves you're just busy, not distant. They rationalize your silence as pride, not power. They try to interpret your peace as a performance, not progress. But deep down, they know. They know they took something rare and treated it like it would always be there. They thought love could be paused and resumed at their convenience, as if your heart was some kind of emotional time capsule, preserved in longing. But what they didn't realize was that love, when unreciprocated, transforms. It doesn't disappear, it evolves. It stops reaching and starts returning inward. And now they're feeling what you once felt. The ache of someone slipping away, not in anger, but in evolution. They hold on not because they suddenly understand you, but because they finally understand the void your absence has left behind. That void is unfamiliar to them. They're used to being the one who decides the rhythm of connection. They were the one who set the pace, who pulled away and came close on their terms. But now they no longer get to choose. You are no longer reacting to their movements. You've stopped dancing to the rhythm of their inconsistency, and for the first time, they are outside the orbit of your attention, and that unfamiliar position awakens a fear they never anticipated. They try to reconnect, but now it's different. You're not eager, you're not angry, you're just clear, and that clarity feels like distance to someone who only ever knew how to relate through emotional chaos. There's a part of them that regrets, but regret is tricky. It doesn't always come with a confession. Sometimes it looks like passive checking in. Sometimes it comes as admiration from afar. Sometimes it's disguised as silence, but filled with longing. You might not hear from them directly, but they are there, watching, wondering, and most of all, waiting. Waiting for a sign that you still care. Waiting for the invitation they never earned, waiting for you to open the door they once walked out of without hesitation. And that waiting, that is the irony, because you know that space well. You lived in it. You held on while they drifted. You memorized every contour of uncertainty, every shade of absence. But now the roles have reversed. And while they hold on to what they remember, you've moved forward into who you are becoming. The truth is, what they miss isn't just you. It's the version of themselves they were when they were with you. The way you made them feel safe, even when they were chaotic. The way you believed in them, even when they gave you reasons to doubt. The way you made space for them, even when it left you empty. They remember that, and now that space has closed. You no longer overextend. You no longer reach. You no longer explain. And in doing so, you forced them to face a version of themselves that no longer has your light to reflect. That absence becomes a teacher, a cruel, necessary one. It shows them who they are when they can't rely on your forgiveness to cushion their self-neglect. It shows them that the comfort they mistook as guaranteed was actually grace. And grace, when unappreciated, doesn't return, it retreats. Now they're the ones scrolling through your photos at midnight, reading into your captions, trying to decode your peace. They're the one holding their phone and hovering over the message button, typing, deleting, typing again. But you don't need to see it. You don't need to know, because this part of the journey isn't about them anymore. It's about the quiet power of healing, the beautiful detachment that happens when you finally release not just the person, but the need for them to understand your worth. You don't carry bitterness, you don't wish them harm, you simply let them go, fully, finally. And that is the most loving thing you can do, not for them, but for yourself. You used to wonder if they'd ever feel what you felt, if they'd ever sit with the weight of what they threw away. Now you know. Not because they said it, not because they confessed, but because you no longer need them to. You can feel it in the shift, in the silence, in the way they linger now, the way you once did. This is the irony, the circle completing itself, the truth returning to its origin. They left thinking you'd stay waiting, but now they wait for a version of you that no longer exists. 6. The power choosing not to return. There's a quiet strength in not going back. In a world that glorifies reunion stories and romanticizes the idea of rekindled love, there's something deeply radical about choosing yourself, especially when the opportunity to return is right there, tempting, nostalgic, familiar. They reach out finally, maybe with an apology, maybe with confusion, maybe with a well-crafted message that dances around their regret but never quite lands in full ownership. And for a moment, you pause. Not because you miss them, but because the part of you that once would have dropped everything is now silent. You don't rush to respond. You don't feel the adrenaline of hope pumping through your chest. You feel calm, clear, centered. And that stillness, that unwavering stillness, is where your real power lives. You realize they're not reaching out to love you better. They're reaching out to feel loved again. There's a difference. One heals, the other takes. And you've healed too much to let someone come back just to feel good in your presence, without being responsible for how they treated it. You remember the nights you cried for them, the days you walked through like a ghost, waiting for their attention, their effort, their recognition. You remember the waiting, the wondering, the way your soul was stretching just to feel worthy in their eyes. You remember how hard you tried to make it work with someone who barely tried to understand you. And now, here they are, texting, calling, showing up with promises and passion. But passion without consistency is chaos in disguise. You don't need sparks anymore. You need peace, and peace doesn't beg you to stay up wondering if you're enough. Peace doesn't leave you questioning your reality. Peace doesn't pull away when it gets uncomfortable. And so you choose not to return. Not out of pride, not out of revenge, but because peace has become your new home, and you've finally made it feel like a place you belong. The strength it takes to walk away is one kind of power. But the strength it takes to not go back when they finally realize your worth, that's a deeper kind. That's the power of wisdom, of clarity, of boundaries that aren't built out of bitterness but out of self-respect. You're not punishing them. You're protecting you. And the version of you that crawled through heartbreak to get here deserves to be protected. They had their chance. And not just one. You gave grace and time and patience. You forgave without apologies. You stayed long after you knew you should have left. And even when they walked away, you still hoped. But healing changes everything. Healing is not about forgetting them. It's about remembering yourself. And now that you remember who you are, you understand why going back would cost you too much. They don't see the full picture. They only see that you're glowing now, that you're calm, that you're no longer reaching. What they don't see are the nights you held yourself together, the mornings you had to rebuild your self-worth from scratch, the internal work, the boundaries, the hard decisions. They see the result, but not the process. And because they didn't walk that journey with you, they don't get to benefit from the version of you that journey created. That's the truth of Stoic relationships. People only deserve access to you if they've earned it, not just if they remember you. And remembering you is not enough. Regretting how they treated you is not enough. Wanting another chance is not enough. Their desire doesn't override your peace. Their longing doesn't obligate your return. Maybe your heart still stirs when you hear their name. Maybe the memories still come in waves. But you no longer confuse nostalgia for a sign. Missing someone and needing them back are not the same thing. Love can remain while attachment is released. You've learned to love from a distance, to grieve what was without clinging to what isn't, to honor the role they played in your story without rewriting the ending to fit a fantasy. You no longer make decisions based on loneliness. You make them based on alignment. And if they don't align with the life you're building, then they don't belong in it, no matter how many sweet words they send or how many old feelings they try to stir. They had their moment. They chose what they chose, and so did you. Now you're choosing silence where there used to be pleading, choosing stillness where there used to be storms, choosing to not answer the door they once slammed shut. You've come too far to go back to confusion, too healed to go back to what broke you, too aware to go back to blindness. And that choice, choosing not to return, is a decision your old self would marvel at. You've become the version of you that once felt impossible. And that is not something to risk for a moment of emotional déjà vu. They may say all the right things now, but love, real love, is not words, it's consistency, it's growth, it's accountability. And unless they show those things with clarity and proof, their reach is not a welcome return, it's a test of your new boundaries. And you pass that test not by explaining yourself, but by remaining grounded. You've got nothing to prove, no story to explain, just a future to protect. If this truth resonates, if you've ever stood in that moment where you could have gone back but instead chose yourself, like and comment number 1 if you enjoyed this video. That moment is everything, and if you haven't yet subscribed, do it now. These are the stories we need to hear. These are the choices that reshape our lives. You are not alone on this journey, and what's ahead will only elevate you further, because choosing not to return doesn't mean you never loved. It means you finally love yourself enough to break the pattern. It means you're no longer addicted to the idea of potential. It means you understand that closure doesn't always come in conversation. Sometimes it comes in the quiet certainty that you deserve more. It means you're willing to release the past, not because it was worthless, but because you are finally living like you're worthy. That's not bitterness. That's liberation. And from that place, everything changes. You're not the same person they left behind. And no matter how much they wish to revisit the past, you're no longer there. You've grown, you've healed, and most importantly, you've chosen. Not them, you. 7. The lesson: you don't wait for those who walk away. There's a lesson that only life can teach, and it doesn't arrive in a classroom or a conversation. It arrives in the hollow echo of footsteps walking away, in the silence that follows a door that closes without warning, in the quiet aftermath of being left behind by someone who once promised to stay. It's in that silence where the lesson begins to take shape, not immediately, not with clarity, but slowly, painfully, through reflection, through tears, through sleepless nights spent, replaying every word, every gesture, every choice that led them to leave. At first, you believe the story you've been taught, that maybe if you wait long enough, they'll return, they'll realize, they'll finally understand what they gave up. But that hope, while intoxicating, is deceptive. It keeps you rooted in the past, chained to a version of reality where your worth is still dependent on someone else's ability to see it. And the truth is this: anyone who walks away from you without looking back has already told you everything you need to know, and no amount of waiting will change a heart that was never willing to choose you when it mattered most. The painful reality is that we've been conditioned to equate love with endurance, to believe that holding on is proof of commitment, that loyalty is about how long you can stay in pain and still smile. But endurance is not love, it's survival. And survival is not a relationship. You don't win by waiting for someone who walked away. You lose time, energy, joy, moments of your life that could have been spent healing, discovering, evolving. And waiting for someone who left is not a sign of strength. It's often a reflection of the fear of being alone, of the hope that maybe they'll come back better, wiser, different. But Stoicism teaches us to separate what we control from what we don't. And no matter how deep the connection once was, you cannot control someone else's choice to leave, nor their timing, nor their journey. What you can control is whether you keep your life on pause in hopes that they'll one day return to press play again. The lesson, when it finally settles into your bones, is sharp but freeing. You don't wait for those who walk away, because love does not abandon. Love stays, grows, struggles, repairs. Love communicates. Love returns with intention, not confusion. When someone walks away from you, they are communicating something that their words never could. They are showing you their priorities, their fears, their readiness or lack thereof. And it is not your job to translate their silence into hope. It is your job to listen to the message and choose yourself. You begin to realize that waiting is not noble when it robs you of your future. It is not romantic when it leaves you empty. It is not patient when it is really just fear wearing a mask. You don't need to prove your love by staying where you were left. You prove your growth by stepping forward, even when your heart still looks back. There is no victory in longing. There is no healing in hoping someone who broke you will be the one to fix you. That's not healing, it's fantasy. And living in fantasy is just another way of avoiding reality. The reality is, people will leave. Sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly, sometimes without a reason that makes sense. And you will hurt. You will ache in places you didn't know existed. But eventually you will rise. Not because they came back, but because you stopped waiting. Because you realized that your life is too sacred to be spent in limbo. Because you learned that your love is too valuable to be given on a timeline that only benefits someone else's growth. You don't wait for those who walk away, because the person who deserves your love is the one who shows up and stays. And it's not about being cold. It's about being wise. It's about honoring your time, your peace, your energy. It's about choosing not to sacrifice your progress for someone who wasn't willing to stay and build with you when it mattered. This is the heart of Stoic relationships. Not waiting to be rescued, but learning to rescue yourself. Learning to sit with the discomfort, to mourn the loss, to feel the grief fully, and then to let it go. You may still love them. You may still carry memories, but you no longer make decisions based on their absence. You no longer rearrange your life to leave space for a potential return. That space is now reserved for you, for your dreams, for your healing, for the people who choose you every single day without hesitation. The moment you stop waiting is the moment you reclaim your life. It doesn't mean you're over it. It means you've chosen to live with it, not for it. It means you've chosen to create joy again, to laugh again, to plan again, not because you don't feel the loss, but because you refuse to be defined by it. They made a choice, so did you. They walked away. You decided not to follow. That's the quiet revolution of healing, not in grand gestures, but in the everyday decision to keep moving forward, to get up when it still hurts, to believe in your future more than your past, to trust that letting go of who they were is the only way to become who you are meant to be. And when the dust settles, when you've built a life that feels like home, without them you'll look back, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You'll thank the moment they walked away, not because it didn't hurt, but because it set you free. Free to see yourself clearly, free to choose differently, free to build relationships based on mutual effort, not emotional imbalance. That's the final lesson. Your worth is not up for negotiation. It is not dependent on someone else's journey. It does not need to be proven through suffering. The person who left may never return. They may never apologize. They may never understand. But you don't need them to. Because your healing is not contingent on their awareness. It's rooted in your decision to move forward, regardless. This is the truth they don't tell you in stories. The most courageous love you'll ever experience is the one you give yourself, when someone else no longer does. It's the decision to close the door with grace, to grieve fully and still grow, to stop waiting and start living. That's not just healing, that's power. And you, right now, are standing in it. They thought you'd wait. That's how this all began. But as we've walked through every moment, through the silence, the rediscovery, the shift, the power, and the final lesson, you've come to realize something much deeper. You never needed to wait to be chosen. You only needed to remember that you already were by yourself. This journey, as painful and raw as it was, has become your path to awakening. It wasn't about getting them back. It wasn't about proving your worth to someone who walked away. It was about returning to yourself in ways that only loss could teach you. They may never know the battles you fought to find peace, the nights you whispered affirmations through tears, the days you forced yourself to rise when your heart begged you to retreat. But you know, And knowing that, truly knowing that, changes everything. You've built your peace brick by brick, not out of bitterness, but out of boundaries. You've created a life that doesn't depend on their return, because you understand now what walks away is no longer meant to stay. And even if they come back, it doesn't mean you should. Because healing has shown you that love is not about waiting, it's about walking forward with grace, even when your heart still echoes the past. So if this video spoke to something deep inside you, if you found yourself reflected in these words, I invite you to like and comment #1 if you enjoyed this video. Let me know that you're not just listening, you're rising. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe. We're building a space here for real stories, real growth, real power, no sugarcoating, no fantasy, just the truth and the strength it takes to live it. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for being brave enough to choose yourself. I'll see you in the next video. Stay grounded, stay free, stay you.